All
Scary.
right. We've got people flowing in, so I'll just give it another moment for everyone to come in from the wait list. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your days to come in and hear about the amazing work that's happening with the team at Reef Craft. I'll get us started, and anyone who's still coming in, they'll just miss my intro, so they can always watch it on the recording afterwards. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar with the Reef Craft team. My name is Kirsten Hunter, and I'm the CEO here at Birchal. Just before I introduce the team, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I am calling in today from. Birchal is based on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and also acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us on the call today. So today we are joined by Talam, Cam, Dean, and Nicola from Reef Craft, and Birchal is working with Reef Craft on an upcoming crowdsourced funding offer. For anyone who isn't aware of crowdsourced funding, you might also have heard of it as equity crowdfunding. It's a form of fundraising in Australia that allows startups and small and growing businesses to raise capital from a large number of smaller retail investors and wholesale or sophisticated investors at the same time through an online platform like Birchal. So instead of seeking funding from traditional sources such as banks or venture capital funds or private equity, companies can turn to the general public, often their communities, to raise money in exchange for equity in their business. For founders and business leaders, this is a way to turn their passionate supporters into shareholders. And for investors, it's a way for us to back ideas and back founders who we want to see succeed. And when they do, we get a slice of their success as well. Birchal Financial Services will be the licensed intermediary for this offer. The information and the discussion that takes place in this webinar is for informational purposes only and shouldn't be considered as advice or as a recommendation. Please make sure to do your own research. Always consider the offer document and the general crowdsource funding risk warning before investing. And for more information, you can head on over to birchal.com and click through to the Reef Craft page. Now, how today's session is going to run, so I'm going to hand over to the Reef Craft team who will take us through a presentation all about the amazing work that they're doing, and then we'll switch to a Q&A style discussion. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, kind of down there, you'll be able to see a little Q&A box. So you can type your questions into the Q&A box. That will come through, and I will then facilitate the discussion once the presentation is over. Feel free to drop your questions in at any point during the discussion, and we'll circle back to them when we get to that Q&A part. We are recording today's session, so if you do have to jump off early or something comes up while we're in the middle of the discussion, we will send around the recording afterwards. So without further ado, team, I would love to hand over to you.
Thanks, Kirsten. And yeah, thank you everyone for jumping on this. It means the world for us. For you guys wanting to come and listen to what we're up to, and also potentially the opportunity for you guys to join us as shareholders. What we're going to do to start, we'll just go around and introduce all of ourselves. So I'll start. My name is Cam. I'm one of the founders of Reef Craft. Bit of my background is working a lot with coral cultivation, working with the Aquarium of Western Australia on their coral holding facilities, as also working with temperate and tropical species in closed and open systems, and also the translocations of them around the aquarium and into different areas. And then further on, working with threatened species management, so working with northern corroboree frogs over on the east coast, and implementing husbandry plans, developing breeding techniques, and running release programs for this critically endangered frog, and also being part of some really cool things like the rediscovery of the species in the wild, which was really, really cool to be a part of, and I don't think I'll ever forget that. But that's enough about me. I'll pass it on to Talon.
Thanks, Cam. And hi, I'm Talam McKeever. I am the other co-founder for Reef Craft. So I also have a strong background in coral cultivation and also bring in expertise in environmental regulatory approvals, allowing projects to get delivered through the complex maze of state and federal legislation. And I have ecosystem management background as well. So helping to get the projects approved, up and running, and then helping to get it going.
Fabulous. Shall I start? Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Nicola. I have the privilege of being one of the non-executive directors of Reef Craft. Why I am here? Well, years ago, I used to work in philanthropy and raised millions of dollars with UWA on marine research. So I've got a real passion about, as my son says to me, saving Nemo. So when I was really, really lucky to get a call to say, would you like to get involved in Reef Craft 2 years ago? And it's been awesome getting it to this stage. And I can't believe we're actually here on the call today, 2 years later. But really passionate about making sure that we have sustainable reefs for years to come for the next generation. I work, my day job is at Rio Tinto, working on new mines and seeing what happens and what we need to do to preserve the environment is super paramount. So yeah, really excited, and thank you very much all for joining.
Thanks, Nick. My name is Dean Nolder, and really happy to be here and be involved. My background is more in the corporate sector as a former senior executive of a major banking group. I've also spent time in Parliament and am a former minister in the Barnett state government. Currently spending time as non-executive director on a number of boards, both government and private sector, and in the capacity of non-executive chair for Reef Craft. So really excited to be here and be a part of the journey of this company.
Now, I think we are missing John at the moment. Nick or Dean, would either of you like to give a breakdown like him?
Sorry, Talon, I missed that?
That's all right. I think our last chair member, John Poynton, wasn't able to join us today.
No, I think he's trying to dial on, so we'll bring him in when we get to the finance section, so everybody can ask questions there for him.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, no problems. Well, moving forward then. All right, so I'm going to break down a little bit about us and basically our backstory, where we're going with Reef Craft. So our mission is to deliver the science-backed marine restoration services that regenerate Western Australia's coastal ecosystems. So Reef Craft's foundations really formed back in 2018 and started out with a simple kitchen conversation between Cam and I. I'd recently finished my thesis in 2017 and I was regaling him on the wonders of the thesis research process and explaining a bit about my findings on coral migration due to ocean warming and seeing them trying to escape those heat waves and move further south into cooler waters. And Cam and I were starting to talk about the challenges with this climate drive and reflecting on those declines in marine ecosystems, a real frustrating lack of any kind of successful long-term solution that was practical and sustainable. And this really started to build a bit of an interest as we talked more and more about it. And we started looking into the legislative limitations and requirements behind it, and really just grew into this passion. So after about a year of research and getting an understanding, we started to reach that commercialization readiness phase and started working on our upskilling. So for about 6 years, we spent looking at the ecosystems in Cockburn Sound and across WA, all the way up to Karratha and Pilbara, attending various business meetings and learning a bit about how to form and create a new business. And with that, we also started to develop our respective careers and going in different paths, always with the idea of Reef Craft in the back of our heads and how we can best gain new experience. So Cam followed down through the pathway of threatened species management and ecosystem, conservation management, where I went down the route of the regulatory approvals and ecosystem management, and obviously a bit of coral cultivation between both of us as well. Fast forward to 2023, and Cam and I met up with and started to form the board with Nicola, Dean, and John. And that allowed us to reach this pre-commercialization phase, which really, really helped us take off. We gained so much momentum. Their key networks allowed us to talk to clients directly, getting in the room with those peak decision makers and getting an idea of what industry really wanted. And that's helped us build a really great foundation that we're working with today. So speaking of today, we are now fully approved with an aquaculture lease in Cockburn Sound, which we want to start planting corals on immediately. We're working on that at the moment. And we've obviously launched this crowdfunding campaign to try and get that momentum steered in the right direction.
Cool. So I'll jump in and I'll talk a little bit about the problem that we identified. As a lot of people on this call will know, coral reefs are in decline around the world. You don't have to go far to really see this, like places like Ningaloo, Great Barrier Reef, Indonesia, Fiji, Florida. There's ocean acidification, there's global warming, there's rising sea temperatures, pests, disease, everything that you can imagine would go wrong with corals can go wrong and is going wrong in parts of the world. And in WA, unlike some of these other places, there's really limited to no WA-based marine offset projects. There's small ones here and there, but nothing in relation to sustainable coral reef restoration and propagation for those sort of projects. And if you look at Western Australia as a whole, there's around 361 species of hard coral currently recorded. And when you look at Central Great Barrier Reef, it's about 352. But then at the Great Barrier Reef as a whole is around 460. So a lot of eyes, a lot of money goes towards the Great Barrier Reef and all the corals down our coast from the very tip of Western Australia down to the very bottom don't have much spotlight at all. And we want to bring a spotlight to Western Australia and help governments and industry meet ESG and regulatory requirements for these. Especially, we want to do it in a West Australian way. Our corals are different, but also the same as eastern states and other places. But we also have different environments, so everything needs to be West Australia centric. We can adapt things from other areas, but we want to focus on building up Western Australia as a leader in this area. And a big thing for this is for industry and big projects for the government, they're going to be delayed approvals that lead to lost revenue and massive wait times for projects, especially with the way things are going in the threatened species space. These projects are getting pushed further and further out as they're ballooning with more and more regulatory requirements, and coral reefs are heading that way as well. As Reef Craft, there's a massive opportunity in this. First off, being the early movers in this coral reef specific offsets in Western Australia. We want to leverage proven scientific methodologies and research, as well as restoration techniques that have been proven around the world, and bring them here and adapt them to our species. We also see that with the government and industry, we can help deliver on their ECG and regulatory obligations and assist in enabling faster approvals and reduce project risks for these large projects that might balloon out or cost just go through the roof. And as a whole, we think we can establish a new eco-management industry in Western Australia based around this coral reef restoration and protection that really is built to protect West Australia's unique biodiversity and our reefs, and then hopefully take that to other areas of Australia. Just on the next one, Talum. So this is a good example. A survey done in Cockburn Sound a little while ago, they found a total of around 50 coral colonies in the whole survey. I took this photo in Cockburn Sound, and there's actually 52 colonies on this 2 square meter rock. And it's not a dig at the survey techniques of what was done, but when you're looking for things specifically, you look in areas that a high likelihood of them occurring. And when you're doing a generalized survey, you miss a lot of things. So Cockburn Sound actually has a high density of coral species in certain areas. And this in particular has 8 species in 2 square meters. It's a crazy representation of, if you're looking in the right places, you're going to find what you want to find. And we think this is really important to protect. So what's the solution? The solution is really around propagation and protection of these species. So setting up coral growth and expansion of stock through reef propagation. This first project is all about translocation. So we want to learn everything there is to do around translocation of these temperate species. We want to move these local species away from disturbance events in the future, so that we can mitigate against any sort of disturbance that's going to happen in that area, whether that be dredging, whether they're going to be putting in new rock walls or break seas or expanding ports and things like that. And this will actually allow us to develop a coral seed bank for that area to preserve those local species, and then future things down the track, we are already set up to mitigate against these and restore areas immediately, rather than having to set up and have that lag time for these projects. This in all will improve the social license of our clients, and it'll help us re-establish these corals post-disturbance quicker, so we can build up that biodiversity in a really, really quick and fast way, and turning these artificial reefs or degraded seabeds into living, thriving reef ecosystems.
Yeah, so really these processes are built around generating revenue. We've got to be a self-sustaining business at the end of the day in order to do what we want to do. So we're very focused on developing towards the blue economy. You can see here the global blue economy is estimated at over $1.5 trillion around the world. And a lot of that is an underestimate. We found a lot of research suggesting that that number could be as high as 4 or 5 trillion. So there's a bit of a range there, but it's definitely sitting quite high globally. And that blue economy is really expanding quite quickly as industries are looking to prioritize sustainable solutions to meet the ESG objectives that they have in those organizations for the projects that they are starting to bring online. We're really well positioned with Reef Craft to meet at that intersection between a growing economy that's not really being accessed very efficiently here in WA, and also being able to meet the critical need for conservation of a well-known and loved environment that has historically not been very well maintained so far in WA in particular. So we split that into 3 primary initial revenue streams. The first one, we like to call it reef forestation. That is a contracted reef restoration project for coastal development. And that can be essentially broken down into a tailored coral and reef rehabilitation plans, construction, dredging, and other coastal activities that may have an impact that we can come in and we can either help offset or restore a site after the completion of those events. And we can really tailor that to match the size and need of the client. So whether that be a massive 2-hectare restoration project spanning over a large impact zone, say after a dredging event, or going down to something as small as a couple of square 100 meters just to, say, beautify a settlement or improve the local fisheries in an area. The next being environmental offsets. So that's a focus for us on a science-based offset solution for industries that need to meet their strict regulatory approvals. So just to give you the context, it's kind of somewhat similar to land-based mines where they need to rehabilitate the site after the completion of, or let's say the closure of pits, and be able to demonstrate the long-term return of the ecosystem. And we're focusing on allowing those developers to offset their impacts, knowing that ultimately the goal is that it's going to happen anyway. So we can come along and we can support them to provide a really beneficial environmental impact that offsets directly in the area that's being potentially affected. That can be provided through, say, seabed buybacks or just general restoration in an area or somewhere nearby. And lastly, we've got our future nature credits. So long term, we're looking to develop a robust system of biodiversity and credit systems where essentially we can take advantage of these emerging markets such as carbon credits and biodiversity credits. To give you that context, each individual farm that we set up, every reef that we restore, all these places, they're gaining more biodiversity, more biomass that we are able to then leverage to say, well, look, here we replanted this reef, that's got a benefit. And there are markets such as biodiversity credit systems that are starting to recognize that value. We also believe that holistically speaking, the generation of reefs can still, to some extent, help with that carbon offset balance. And we're going to be actively researching in support of organizations like CWA that works with UWA. And we have some great researchers in mind that are helping us to prepare that, and starting off with our farm here in Cockburn Sound as well.
So yeah, taking a look at, well, thanks, Talon. All of that is, bright skies, big future. Narrowing it back down to Cockburn Sound's blue economy opportunity. A lot of people will say there's no corals in Cockburn Sound, but the picture up above, feel free to go back and have a look. There's a big amount of species that exist and have existed in Cockburn for a long time. And we think it's a great place to start because they are facing similar threats to tropical species. However, they have an added benefit of a warm water buffer. It is colder down here, and the water is colder. So these species are naturally buffered against the changes, especially when it comes to global warming. And these species will also live happily in higher temperatures as well. So it gives them that bit of a buffer. And we propose that the following opportunities are reef restoration in Cockburn Sound, so long-term habitat and species richness studies for coral reefs. There is a recognized gap in this already, and going through and doing new reef forestation and repairing degraded reefs, going behind sort of projects that are happening in the area and then going and fixing up these areas. And then infrastructure protection and beautification for like rock walls and any sort of marine construction that happens in these areas. Rather than just letting things grow back, we can go in early and bolster the biodiversity in these areas really quickly and bring a lot more value to those areas. There's also a massive ecotourism and public engagement, reaching out to schools and community engagement, whether that's through community replantation events, snorkels, providing areas that are really, really rich in biodiversity, coral species and fish species. And then there's obviously the future developments that are happening in Cockburn Sound. So with Westport development and Coogee Marina expansions and so on, there's some big opportunities there that we can go in behind and do reforestation or repair degraded areas with the coral species that we'll be holding on our Coogee coral arc of sorts. And the future development is to have this more long term and have this Coogee coral arc where the coral farm is established as sort of the first living coral seed bank in Western Australia. You're muted, Talon.
Thank you. So not a lot of this is all that new as a concept. So we've seen other organizations around the world doing similar things, even over on the East Coast in the Great Barrier Reef. Well, realistically, our competitive advantage comes from a few key elements. First off, being, as Cam touched on earlier, we do have an early mover advantage. As we're pioneering this high-value marine impact offset and ecosystem restoration market in WA, we're essentially looking to meet the demand that industry already has, but isn't really being met. There's an understanding that the legislation's changing and they're going to need to start exploring better options that are more localized. But really, the limitations to what's available and what they can be done long term has been a real strain, and it's ultimately ended up with them seeking alternatives that aren't necessarily in the interest of that environment. We also have a scientifically robust process backed by years of academic research into corals and the resilience. We really understand the requirements of a restoration project, particularly through Cam's experience as a threatened species expert and conservation management expert, as well as our backing in coral reef cultivation in general. And we understand that interconnectivity of the overarching ecosystem and how those diverse coral species can have an interplay that essentially support each other and allow their collective group to become more resilient to impacts in their environment, such as climate, or potentially allowing them to outcompete with things that often bring them back, such as algae and that. We also come with regulatory expertise, particularly through myself. I've got experience in approvals delivery, expertise in ensuring that projects not only get the approvals that they need, but then also are able to continue through the project in compliance to their eventual delivery. We want to make sure that our regulators appreciate that we are doing everything we can to make sure that it arrives exactly how they wanted it, but also in the respect of the client and their needs. We're backed by a really strong coral cultivation background, and we've got over 16 years of combined experience in having that direct hands-on coral cultivation and CAM's threatened species management as well. And that really allows us to go through the process. You know, it's one thing to just plant a coral, but you need to know when to do it, where it needs to go, and at what stages you can interact with it so you get the maximum chance of success. And that's a long-term process. That's not just 1 or 2 years and then harvest and off we go. Now, our methodology also brings a really strong scalability to the design as well. And that allows us to deliver projects of whatever size needs to be utilized for the specific client without compromising on the quality or the ecological benefits that that farm will have, or that restoration. So then whether that be a 2-hectare post-dredging event like I talked about before, or just a simple 200-meter settlement beautification process. And to top it off, on top of all of this, we've come in with a really excellent board that brings a financial acumen and networking that is second to none. They have a robust financial governance and expert oversight for strategic deployment and scaling of various businesses. They provide high-level networking and access to key regulatory bodies, capital markets, industry decision makers, and they really help us accelerate our commercial opportunities and client acquisition. And that is something that they've been working at every day, and it's really been quite amazing to see what they can bring. And ultimately, all of this culminates with their expertise in strategic project execution, managing and delivering those large-scale strategic projects, particularly Nicola, with her resource sector experience, has been really incredible. So just to quickly summarize, the biggest barrier to entry here for this market is needing to have that scientific understanding of the complex interplays with coral reef ecosystems, but also having that direct hands-on expertise to cultivate corals. And then additionally, needing to have that sufficient understanding of the really complex regulatory requirements of state and federal legislation in order to deliver those approvals and ensure that they're compliant right the way through to the end. Now, this can typically be achieved by a business at a relatively high cost by either bringing in experts to support their teams or to have several individuals on their team that each individually house a specific skill set. What really sets us apart is how Cam and we have all of this experience tied in together in one, and we've been working together for years, and we have a really excellent understanding of how everything needs to be done.
Yeah, awesome. So what does your support provide us? Well, it provides us the ability to protect all of this. All of these are corals found in the temperate regions around Cockburn Sound. And there's also an anemone there too, which is that one on the far right. Basically, with your support, we can get moving on this a lot faster. We can start to focus on securing 2 to 3 commercial contracts for the restoration work. Also looking to do bigger and better collaborations with universities and other like UWA, and have dedicated studies on these reef restoration, especially in Cockburn Sound, and also looking at the ecology, the species, the biodiversity, and carbon credits. It really bolsters all of that. We also have the potential, it also means we can purchase a lot more monitoring equipment and research equipment. And the fundraising also helps us demonstrate to the public interest in WA, so that when we go to regulatory bodies, we can have a bit more oomph behind us, and really be able to make a difference in Cockburn Sound. Yeah, that's where we finish off with some questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, team. That was such an awesome presentation, and I'm sure that all of the potential investors here will also feel this real excitement when I think you see a business that has both a really strong impact and a really strong business potential as well. So thank you. I have a number of questions that have come through the Q&A box. For anyone else who's sitting on the call who might have questions but not yet have submitted them, please drop them in. You can find that Q&A box down the bottom of the Zoom screen window if you haven't already found it. I'm going to walk us through the questions, not in the order that they've been submitted, but in an order I think that kind of makes sense, because a few of them touch on similar principles. But to start off with, I normally like to start with a bit of a question around the team, but you guys did such an awesome job at the beginning letting everyone know your backgrounds, with the exception of John, who wasn't here. So John, I'd love to start us off with a quick intro from you and how you came to be a part of the Reef Craft team.
Yeah, my apologies for being there person. I'm a bit of an echo, so I'll talk through it. So everybody.
We got you. There's this too. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, something funny going on. Keep talking, John.
Okay. All right. So look, I've had a background in financial services for a very long time as a stockbroker and an investment banker and a consultant. I've also got a number of businesses myself, and I'd like to most of them have been successful, but the ones that haven't, I've learned from in terms of what's needed to make a successful. What attracted me to this was the combination of very scientific ability, credentials, with people who understand that it's all very well to be scientifically credentialed, but you also need to be able to generate revenue and build a business if trying to deploy that skill. And so Cam, Tullum, we've got 2 scientists who understand the way that it works, want to build a business, that there's an opportunity to build, I think, quite a lot here. Where I come in is, I guess, bringing in that experience of having grown and run businesses before. My experience is always about trying to instill a discipline around the governance, making sure that everything's been monitored, that everything's been done one kind of way, in a way that a listed company will be run. And sometimes small companies are actually quite tricky to achieve that early on. But there's an expression about starting as you intend to finish. And I think we've got all the building blocks in place here to build a scientific, credible, commercially successful backing team that is on the screen. I'm delighted to be involved. We've got something really cool to bring to the market and to bring to the environment. This is totally, it's absolutely required in Western Australia. I think what we have is quite unique. So delighted to be involved. Sorry I wasn't here the start.
Fantastic. Again, I just think you guys have built such an awesome team, and it's clear that you all bring something really different to the mission that you have here at Reef Craft. So I'm going to try and separate the questions into kind of impact and what the company actually does, output kind of focused questions from the investment questions, although obviously they are quite overlapping because the company does increase its impact as its business metrics grow as well. But there's a couple of questions on here around logistical things. So can you talk about the existing projects that you have managed or overseen so far and their successes, and also how you go about translocating the coral? Where does it go from and where does it go to?
Yep, so I can cover off the translocation part. So the translocation of the coral it'll all be local species. We're not translocating from other regions. So all the species that will be translocated from areas within Cockburn Sound, around areas that will have future disturbance, and they'll be translocated onto the growth structures in Cockburn Sound. So they're not moving far. They're not going to land. We're using a licensed coral collector to do this pilot project to get this one going, and we have a good working relationship with this particular collector. So it'll always be trying to get localized corals. So when we expand, looking further north or rot nest and places, we won't be bringing coral species with us. It'll all be from that local area to deliver for local projects, so that we reduce the risk of biosecurity, disease and pest outbreaks. We don't want to be part of, a cane toad or anything like that.
Yeah. As far as our previous experience, I believe the other part of that question, what projects we've done before. So as Cam touched on, this particular project in Cockburn Sound is a pilot project for applying our restoration methods in the natural environment down here in Cockburn. Our previous experience really comes from a few different aspects. So whilst this is our first active farm that we ourselves are managing, we also have a lot of direct experience in various systems. So we both worked at Aqua. Cam himself was instrumental in redeveloping the coral, what's the word I'm looking for here? The habitats that we have set up there at Aqua to basically restructure a lot of it. I mean, a lot of the renovations, he had a free hand in making sure the systems were managed adequately. It's a flow-through system, so it's all using water that exists in that natural environment already, and it's flowing through. So our hands-on experience comes through Aqua, various personal and professional positions. We've worked through various retail in our younger years as well. And we have our degrees. I myself had that thesis as well that provided more insight in how our corals are managing to survive, or how they will thrive in the future climate.
Fantastic. I think you've mostly answered this other question here as well around what is the kind of the potential scope of these species that you're propagating to be used outside of the specific area, by talking about the local propagation in each area. But I suppose the parts of the question that are still there is, can you share the location that you have within the Sound, and how big is the area that those species that you're working with will be able to be rehabbed?
Yeah, so with that one, the area being able to be rehabbed will be, Talon might have to correct me on the exact distance, but it's pretty much anywhere within Cockburn Sound, plus or minus a few kilometers either side. The location of the farm is off CY O'Connor Beach. You'll see Fremantle seaweed. We're adjacent to Fremantle seaweed's lease out there. And I believe I've missed one more question to that. But yeah, it is the expanding. So if we want to do projects further north, say Jurien Bay, the Abrolhos, Karratha, we'll have key specific species from that area through targeted surveys, and then implement farming techniques or source corals, different ways to do the restoration projects up there.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So,
Sorry, Talon, did you want to add to that?
yeah, absolutely. So as Cam touched on, and you can see here in this map, this is early. Our farm itself in Cockburn is allowing us to cultivate the corals we need to begin that next phase of restoration. So it's a gentle dance of working between regulators and ensuring that we get all the approvals we need to begin replantation. But this first year or so does require us to cultivate those corals first. So we started off with a slightly smaller lease area, and we're working actively with the regulators, so DPIRD in this case for aquaculture, to allow us to expand that lease area as we get more corals on and as we get more cultivation underway. So it's really a rolling process that we are gradually expanding over time, and always communicating with the regulators, making sure everyone's on the same page and ensuring that we get to that end result. And you can see that end result is pretty much wherever we can get. We know that there are corals pretty much north to south, and we want to be involved in making sure that it all gets the same treatment. There's no need to focus solely on the places that everyone knows about, because there are some really beautiful coral reefs out there that are just not well known yet.
Yeah. Fantastic. So there's a question on here. Are you planning to be for profit or non-profit? So this is an investment rather than a kind of donation drive here. So by investing, you are becoming a shareholder in Reef Craft. But I wonder, team, if you can talk through a little bit how you thought about that sort of balance between the impact motives that you have for the business and the sort of business or profit motives, and how you see them feeding off each other.
Yeah, that's a really great question. We understand that there are certain ways that the business world operates, and in order for us to be able to successfully deliver a project with this kind of a scale, we need to be able to have a steady and sustainable revenue stream. So we opted for what we call a profit for purpose model. So not looking to go through the process of constantly looking for grant acquisitions or the donations of willing individuals and organizations, but rather developing a product through our reef restoration services that generates the necessary revenue, not only to fund that project, but also to allow us to then work on funding that next one, getting ahead of the next request, and being able to have something ready to go for the potential clients that we approach.
Fantastic. There's a question on here around how are you monitoring or reporting on the impact? And so the specific ask here is, if a company or an organization is investing into Reef Craft, how will you communicate the impact of what you're able to deliver off the back of that investment, so that they can sort of share it back for their own corporate measures? Can you share about how you're thinking about it beyond strictly the qualitative descriptions? So impact measurement more broadly.
Yeah, another really great question. So we have already been in talks and have arranged for a doctor at UWA within their fish and ecosystem sciences to be part of the project itself. So they will be right at day one monitoring the ecological benefits of the reef that we start to plant. That's just beginning with the farms. They'll be coming in and looking at the biodiversity and providing that quantitative data that we not only want, but also need to be able to show that our services are having a tangible benefit. And that all feeds into our future development, how we can market to, say, biodiversity and carbon credits. So we have great relationships with a lot of the universities here in WA, and we're working actively to bring them on board. And with that, as Cam mentioned as well, part of our funding structure, and depending on how much that we can, I guess, raise in this early phase crowdfund, will determine what kind of impact and what extent of research that we can do in this early phase and how involved they can be. But Cam and I are also scientists ourselves. We finished and graduated marine science degrees, and we have experience in this too. So we'll be providing and assisting with the data collection too.
Fantastic. There's a couple of time questions on here. How long does it take from a seedling coral getting it to plate size? And then kind of like the next question of that, how do your coral growth and cultivation rates compare to your anticipated business growth rate and cash flow projections? Will the business be able to scale fast enough to be sustainable?
Yeah, so I can probably cover this. Corals are fickle. I'll start with that. Depending on where they're growing, depending on their environment, depending on the species, really depends on its growth rate. A lot of the corals you find down in Cockburn Sound are growing in colder waters. This means that they have a slower growth rate than what you would expect in tropical species. Tropical species from the size, what was it, to a plate?
That was the first question.
Yeah, that can, in the tropics, it can be done in 6 to 12 months, depending on the species. Species of Montipora can do that. But then if you go to things like Echinopora, they're a lot more slower growing species, a lot more aggressive, and they have different tactics to growth. For the scalability side of things, tropics, no problem. Down south, there's not a lot of research into growth rates of these species. So that's part of this, is we want to put back into studies and research into these species and really bolster our knowledge base on this. These species will take longer to grow, and these projects, they will take slightly longer than a tropical one. However, being able to go back in with seedling size corals and translocate them to areas, we'll be able to bring more biodiversity to that area quicker than waiting 20 to 30 years for it to grow or seed naturally, if it ever gets there. Most of the time, they're outcompeted on these rock walls by macroalgae and things like that.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
I thought I'd just chime in here a little bit, because the last two questions also have that ESG target component, so the scalability. So this is the financial side of it. So working in big business, and I've worked for Woodside before, the companies, especially in our resource sectors here in Western Australia, are tied to deliver their ESG targets. So regardless of how quickly our corals grow, the fact that we are able to monitor, report back, and help companies, especially those that are doing works in the ocean or close to the ocean, we'll be able to help them. That especially is a huge revenue stream for us. So to answer, kind of to build on what Cam and Talon both said, there's also that opportunity there, and we've got great contacts within some of these companies to be able to help them hit their ESG targets. And that is not necessarily a time-based, it's just being able to prove the work that's being done is actually growing, and as Cam just said, with biodiversity as well.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that perspective as well, Nicola. There are a couple of questions on here around the revenue stream. So you mentioned the reforestation, which I love the play on words there, offsets and nature credits as the 3 revenue streams. So how big do you think each of those segments could be, sort of initially within WA and then more broadly? And also, how is the business sort of looking across those areas? Do you have any paying customers, or at what stage are your discussions at across those three segments?
I love the power loading of the questions. It's good. Well, I'll try and answer them all. So in terms of revenue streams and what we have at the moment, we're not generating revenue actively. However, we are working and have received recent grants. A couple of years ago, we achieved a $90,000 grant for work up in the Pilbara. We currently have a couple more in the 10, 20K margins that we've recently received, just to allow us to get that little movement going. In terms of how we sort of see it at the moment, so the reforestation, that one probably sit in our sort of 60% margin, and potentially a bit higher in these early years, as that's a sort of primary focus. the environmental offsets and the future nature credits, they're a little bit more of a future focus. So the biodiversity credits in particular from that future nature credits is something that does need some active research so that we can quantify the value. So we sort of set that at the moment in that 10% margin for the next 5 to 10 years, but it can potentially expand. Environmental offsets is another challenging space because it does get involved in that Part 4, Part 5 environmental approvals processes with our Environmental Protection Authority. So there's a layer to that one that we are actively working on, but that can be leveraged off the back of existing reforestation services. So initially, main focus will be on that reforestation. We've got some pretty good projections on how we are going to manage that, still fine-tuning the final components, which will have a bit more play in negotiating with our initial clients, but we basically focusing on a model of an initial startup fee based on the size or area that we want to work on. And then there'll be a rolling maintenance fee that allows us to offset any potential costs and allow us to progress on to the next phase or expand as necessary.
Fantastic. So there are a couple of questions around that future nature credits bucket. I know this is an area that's sort of in development, but is this utilising the federal nature repair market? And how do you see the regulation in this space rolling out? Do you have a bit of a feel from your conversations with regulators or what you've heard around the expected timeline for the generation and sale of credits? And how are you thinking about, you've probably answered the second part of this question in terms of how you're thinking about it in terms of the business by initially seeing it as a fairly small contribution to the revenue projections for the early part. But yeah, how do you see this new opportunity here unfolding?
Yeah. Well, trying to think of the way to start it. So in terms of the nature repair market, it's not particularly focused on the marine environment at this stage. My understanding of a lot of the nature repair market is associated with conservation species and threatened ecological communities of specific import to federal and state. It doesn't necessarily go into marine yet, and that I think is a big part of where we want to come in. Dean, I'm sure you can jump in at any moment in terms of the network that he brings, being in former political positions as a previous state minister. That puts us in the door, and we have had previous meetings with environmental ministers before just to see where the legislation's at and try to use our understanding of that process to be able to drive the legislation forwards. There's a lot of money in it, and I think that the marine environment deserves a bit of a part of that too. In terms of the regulations itself, it's very clear that they're changing, and a lot more to the stricter side, I suppose, is a simple way to put it. Things are becoming tighter. The challenge to get approvals to do projects is becoming harder and harder for these larger businesses, particularly in that resources sector. And they are having to look further and wider to understand what options are available. And the real challenge has been that there's not really been much here to allow those businesses to focus on their marine impacts. So traditionally, it's been either research offsets or going off to elsewhere on the East Coast, for example. And whilst they are getting credits for growing a rainforest, it doesn't necessarily have the same direct impact as focusing in the marine environment like we intend to do.
Yeah, I think I can probably chime in here, Talum. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think that if everybody on the call knows when we're talking about companies, and this is coming from, businesses that are looking at environmental offsets and carbon credits, is there's companies like Onshore Greening Australia, for example, where you go and plant trees and you're able to offset there. The conversations we've had so far, as Talum said, with the minister and also with other bigger bodies like the Westports developments and those opportunities there, which is a huge revenue stream for us, is that it's fairly unknown. So that's when I think we've talked about being the first movers in this space. That's why we've got a doctor at UWA ready to go and do the research and to provide papers. And then there's the opportunity, and Dean can chime in, of us actually going and educating the governmental bodies on what can be done offshore in this space. I don't know if you want to add anything, Dean?
Yeah, look, I think at a federal level, if you look at the DBCA, the federal government is setting parameters around companies impacting on threatened or endangered species, and there's greater compliance requirements for companies that are impacting that. In Cockburn Sound, we know there are special species of coral down there, and we understand that there's going to be challenges for industry that are likely to impact on that. We have two major projects occurring in Cockburn Sound, one being the outer harbour from the state government, the other one being the Defence Precinct. Both of them are likely to have massive impacts on the marine environment within Cockburn Sound. And what we're doing with the pilot project is to demonstrate fundamentally to both state and federal governments, and this is where the partnership with the University of WA is critical, to demonstrate that we have the capability of actually preserving these threatened species and being able to regenerate those areas that are impacted. So when you're talking about multiples of billions of dollars being spent in an area, and they will have those environmental regulations now about what the impact will be on those threatened species, we are setting ourselves up to be a solution for that for industry.
Yeah, fantastic answer. I might just wrap us up there because we are at time. There are still a couple of other questions in the Q&A box here, but I'll pass them through to the Reef Craft team and we'll be able to get answers to those questions out to you over the next couple of days. And just to sort of summarize that as well, I think this is a really important point to make, is that this is an early stage investment opportunity. Investing behind the team here and what they've built so far, there are a lot of things that are unknown, but that's kind of the exciting part when you're investing at the really early stages. You get to be front and center, supporting the team to go out and to do the work to discover these answers and to capture these opportunities. So thank you so much, team, for all of the work that you've done so far in getting the business to this point and for the insights that you've shared in this presentation. I have certainly learned a lot and am very excited for your offer going live next week. So as I mentioned earlier, the recording of this video will be sent around. I guess if you're still here to hear me say that, you don't need to know that. But if you perhaps missed the start of the recording, you'll be able to catch up on that when we share it around. The early access offer campaign for Reef Craft will open on the 25th of November, so next week. So make sure you get your expression of interest in between now and then in order to be one of the first ones to have access to the offer document and the investment opportunity when the offer does go live. Thank you again, team, for joining us and for your excellent, well thought through answers, and to everyone for coming along and listening to the presentation. We will circulate the answers to those unanswered questions, as I mentioned, and if you have any other questions for the team, you can drop them into the Birchal profile page for Reef Craft as well, and we'll be able to come back to you on that forum. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks all for coming. Bye.
Thank you.